Hello and welcome to the webinar, which has been arranged by the National Park. We'll just wait a few minutes so that people can join. I'm just checking to see that everybody who's listening in English can hear me. My name's Catherine Glynn. I'm the Wyddfa Partnership Officer. I work for Snowdonia National Park or Eryri National Park. We're very grateful to welcome Ellen here tonight, but she's going to give us a chat tonight about the history of actually celebrating the park. So thank you ever so much, Ellen. Before we transfer to Ellen, I'll tell you a bit about why we've arranged this event tonight. We've established the Ambassador Scheme 2 years ago now, and it's gone from strength to strength. And now we have nearly 800 members who have now qualified as Eryri Ambassadors. It's a very special scheme and we're very proud of it. It's constantly evolving and it's been a pleasure to work on it for the past 2 years. There's a team of us working on it. It's been difficult because we haven't been able to meet our ambassadors over the past 2 years because of COVID. So the work that you've been doing online has been online. And as a thank you for undertaking that work, we wanted to celebrate and thank you for being ambassadors and for sharing our messages as a park as well. So this is the third event this week. We've had the walk today, we've had the discussions yesterday, and there are other events happening for the rest of the week. So keep an eye on our social media and book your place if you haven't already. I won't keep you any longer. Thank you very much, Ellen. I'll see you at the end. Thanks, Ellen. Thanks, Catherine, and thanks for the invitation to come here to talk today. As somebody who lives and has been brought up in Nantperis, about a mile within the boundaries of the park, it is a great privilege to be here today to celebrate Eryri with a group of people who have spent time appreciating Eryri through the Ambassador Scheme. Eryri National Park was established on the 18th of October 1951, but tonight I want to turn the clock back even further because I would argue that the roots of the values which continue to be at the core of the park's work today actually began to sprout far over 70 years ago, and that the process of getting our ex-grandmothers and granddads to appreciate Eryri's landscape and have aspirations to protect the nature and inherited heritage of the area has been a long-term effort. It's surprising really to think that Eryri has only been celebrated for a century or two. Before this 18th century, not many people thought that there was much beauty in Eryri, mainly because of the area's mountainous nature. To a contemporary person back in the day, mountains didn't have any value. Their soils were thin and their slopes were steep, and most of all, they were perceived as being dangerous. In Dwarf's novel published in 1701, he described North Wales as follows. As follows. So the description of being the very rubbish of Noah's flood refers to the belief that mountains were the remnants of the earth's crust and represented God's anger towards man following the deluge. But during the 18th century, opinions began to change, and it changed for practical reasons, such as road improvements and the fact that the French Revolution signaled the end of European travel. It meant that wealthy people had to find other places to spend their summers. And we see changes in attitudes as well, thanks to the efforts of theorists like Edmund Burke. And in his book, A Philosophical Inquiry into the Origin of Our Ideas of the Sublime and Beautiful, Burke outlines two kinds of beauty, namely the beautiful and the sublime. The beautiful tend to be small, smooth, attractive, and elegant things, and the sublime tend to be huge, threatening, and dark elements, such as mountains, rocks, waterfalls, and as we well know, there are plenty of these in Eryri. Beyond the philosophers, artists also play a part in the process of changing taste. Individuals such as Richard Wilson, who was brought up just outside the border in Penegoes near Machynlleth, and he actually became one of the main artists of the period. And Wilson chose to portray the remote seas of Eryri, such as the Wyddfa from Llynanlla and Llynukau, and also Cadair Idris, portrayed in the photos. The fact that Richard Wilson felt that the landscapes of Wales is suitable to portray continental romantic images says it all, really, and is completely contradictory to the disparaging comments heard at the beginning of this period. And through Wilson's paintings, the idea that the landscape of Wales, and specifically that Eryri, is actually beautiful became popular. Ellen's just checking what the question is in the chat box. So, thanks to the work of Burke and Wilson and many others, the sluice gates to Eryri were opened for many travellers, who in turn praised the landscape of the area, and they published their findings in the form of substantial travel books, such as Thomas Roscoe's travel book, in complete contrast to the description of the back end of creation. Roscoe described Eryri as beautiful and grand, and he states as follows. What I've actually discussed up to now is the English perspective of Eryri, and with such a lot of change in people's tastes, we wondered what was the Welsh people's opinion of Eryri. This brief extract is taken from Taliesin, a magazine printed in 1859, and this is how the author defines Eryri. Eryri, the mountains of Wales, specifically the mountains of Gwynedd, are defences. So slowly but surely, the Welsh too are starting to appreciate Eryri, and there is no doubt that the area is developing in itself into an object of pride among the Welsh, by the Victorian era. But there is a major change afoot during this period, and with the arrival of the railways from the 1850s onwards, Eryri develops and becomes even more popular. And with the railway from London to Holyhead, this enables visitors to wander Eryri with ease. Minor railways such as the viaduct, which was constructed over the Mawddach in 1867, and the railway from Bangor to Llanberis, which was opened in 1869, these railways transform Eryri. And it's not just the mountains of Eryri which attracted visitors. Bala and the shores of Llyn Tegid were a major attraction as well. In 1906, the Herald Gymraeg reporter was proud to state that the town is very full of visitors, some staying for 2 months and others for a shorter season. It is said that the town has never been so full. Like today, many visitors were heading for Eryri with the intention of reaching the summit of Yr Wyddfa. According to Y Cymro, a Welsh newspaper reporter said there has never been such a crowd of visitors climbing to the top of Wyddfa in the living memory as seen in the summer of 1894. Among them were visitors from England, India, France, Switzerland, and America, all of them eager to declare that they were going to be doing Yr Wyddfa. But with more and more people eager to walk mountains, the individual's right to roam develops into a burning issue, and we see ramblers in conflict with landowners as they demand access. In 1884, James Bryce is the MP for South Aberdeen, and he tries to introduce a parliamentary measure, entry to the mountains, and it's a measure which fails. But 4 years later, T. Ellis, the MP for Meirionydd, County Liberals, introduces the Mountain Rivers and Pathways Wales Bill, which is aimed at ensuring the public's right to roam mountain land, moor or wasteland, as follows. For the purposes of recreation, relaxation, or to undertake scientific or historical research, and to make artistic drawings. But although Bryce and Ellis's bills fail, Ellis is described by a Spectator reporter as a pioneer in the cause of public good. At the turn of the century, not only there's a disagreement regarding the relationship between people and the AONBs, people also start to question how it should be developed or how development should actually be prevented in beautiful areas like Eryri. In this passage from a newspaper, there is disagreements between the authors of 2 letters. On the one hand, one of them is adamant against opening the railway from Beddgelert to Penygrwyd and perceive it as vandalism, whilst the other author of the letter is in favour of opening the railway in order to enable people to get to the country and support people's basic right to enjoy nature, stating as follows. Following the destruction of the Great War, protecting areas like Eryri developed into becoming important topics during the 1920s. Following discussions at the National Eisteddfod at Holyhead, the Society to Protect the Beauty of Wales is established in 1928. The Society agrees that the only way to protect incomparable mountains, beautiful seashores, rare industries, and beautiful heritage is through careful planning. In the Round Table magazine, The society state that they are prioritizing the protection of ancient bridges, special gravestones, and want to plant trees and maintain the general interest in the movement to establish a national park for whales in Eryri. And things do start to move in Westminster, and Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald set up an investigation in 1929 as follows. So the official Addison report was published 2 years later in 1931. This report recommended that national park authorities should be established in order to choose the most appropriate areas. Unfortunately, Addison's report under the shadow of a national financial emergency, which prevents any early action. But this report is an important one because it initiates a public debate and it identifies the problems as well as the potential. As usual, the Second World War is listed as one of the main cases for the delay, but in reality, the long-awaited designation came as a result, the direct result of the war. During the dark years of struggle, a new concept dawns in Britain, the concept of there being a brave new world, as follows. And at the end of the war, the revolutionary report of John Dower was published. In his report, Dower defines a national park as follows. In order to protect the nature of the park, buildings and locations, to conserve interest, historical interest, architectural interests, and all of this whilst ensuring that agriculture thrives in a sustainable way. Then in 1949, the government passed the National Park Act and the access to the countryside, which leads to the establishment of a national park, Snowdonia National Park, Eryri National Park now, of course, in 1951. And 70 years later, it's important for us to remember that it was no mean feat to establish Parc Cenedlaethol Eryri National Park. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer any of them if possible. Thank you. Thanks very much, Eileen. That was extremely interesting. It's so interesting to hear the history again. I know you've given this discussion as part of these 70-year discussions, and so it was really so interesting. If you have any questions, you're welcome to type your questions in the question and answer box or in the chat box. We'll wait a bit just to see if anybody has a question that they'd like to ask. Okay, so we've got one question from Angela. Angela's my manager and she works on this scheme, and she's asking, Ellen, it would be really interesting to hear your background on how you've discovered this information. It was a conjunction of different things. When I was doing my master's in Aberystwyth, I wrote an essay on how people's opinions change towards areas such as Eryri and Wales as a whole, and areas such as Scotland, Lake District, Switzerland, and the shift in that people hate mountains and think they they are a punishment from God, and they start appreciating them. And I did regret not concentrating on it as a part of my master's rather than concentrating on the quarries, because it's such an important part of our history here in Eryri. So I'd undertaken some work on travellers and philosophers during this time, because the problem is to find these sources, but there are thousands of travel books, such as the ones that Ned Ward and Thomas Roscoe wrote. So they're a record, and although they're external and English, of course, it's an external view rather than an internal view of Wales from a Welsh person. And I'd undertaken a lot of work on that history as well. And so when the park got in touch last year, wanting me to give a presentation during the anniversary, I undertook more research as to what's been happening in the 20th century, and the fact that people wanted to establish a park. What's interesting in people's reports, such as T.S. Ellis, is the actual special features that people relate to in national parks. The article by the Society for the Conservation of the Countryside states that in order to get a national park in Eryri, that's nearly 100 years ago. And what surprised me when I undertook this research was how much work it was for hundreds of people to get to this stage, to get a national park and to protect the Aon Bays. I don't think people realise that it's been 300 years in the making to establish Eryri National Park. So I looked at the governing reports and the newspapers and records and the government's records and what went on in the Westminster and the bills that they tried to get through. And that's how I discovered the history, really. Brilliant, thank you. And thanks for that great question, Angela. Can I just ask a question as well, please, Ellen? Are there some other things that affected these changes that people perceive the mountains as not being as attractive as they are today? Do you think that establishing a park affected the change in people's perception of the mountains, or are there other things that have affected that, do you think? Yes, especially during the Victorian period, what you get is the Industrial Revolution, people moving from the country to large cities such as Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, and perhaps they all of a sudden felt the need for the countryside and they wanted to escape from the cities, and that's what the railways did. They opened up Eryri and made it accessible and made places such as the Lake District and the Peak Districts accessible. They're all a part of the story, and the Industrial Revolution definitely encourages people to appreciate fresh air, fields, and the feeling of escape. But it's just a change in tastes, and it becomes fashionable. And the French Revolution also plays an important part in that earlier on, because you had everything that every gentleman wanted to do when they were in their late teens, early 20s. They travel around ancient areas in France and Italy, and the French Revolution stops that because it's no longer safe to travel on the continent, and so people had to find a new place to travel to. It's almost when people make fun of those who take a gap year because to find themselves, so to speak. Now people are looking at Scotland and Wales as places that have ancient histories where there are ancient buildings and you can see something totally different to what you saw when you grew up. And it's also, some historians also state that another side effect of the French Revolution was that it brought the countries of the UK closer together, because France was the enemy, and that led to the English being less critical of the Welsh and the Scottish and appreciated them more, because with the comments that we saw, for example, they saw the wildness of the land as a reflection of the fact that the people were barbaric because our landscape was wild. They thought that we were wild, and because UK had to be united in order to fight against France, all of a sudden the English stopped writing such things about Wales, and so it relates a lot to the landscape and the what people thought about us as a nation. It's really interesting, and it has a lot of layers, and I don't think a lot of people know about the relationship that we have with nature and mountainous areas. It's quite bizarre, really. Yes, it's strange to think that people used to think things like that, when now we have over 6,000 visitors coming to the area to go up the Wyddfa and coming to the national park, of course. I think we now have another question. That's so interesting. It would be great to compare with what people think these days. Thank you so much for such an interesting discussion. When I recorded the podcast with you, Katrin, we did say a bit about that we saw the same type of pattern that we saw during the Industrial Revolution, that people wanted to escape from the cities. And to a degree, it repeated itself during COVID, that people want to escape to the countryside to get that freedom. And like I mentioned earlier, the French Revolution stopped the continental travel. COVID also did that, of course, and that's why we had the extremely busy summer in Eryri in 2020. So there were a similar shift happened in the past 10 years. When I was in school, I was working in Pen-y-Pass. I worked there for 7 summers, and every summer became busier and busier. In the past 10 to 12 years, mountaineering has also become fashionable, and escaping from the cities and finding the freedom is very fashionable. History also tends to repeat itself. That's really interesting. Access to water, we've seen that that's become, well, for example, Llyn-Tegid, Imbala and Nant Gwynant, there's been a dramatic increase in the number of people who want to go to water. It's a recreational type of thing that people want to do. Thanks ever so much, Ellen, for your extremely interesting presentation and for joining us tonight. These subjects are so interesting, and it's really important to us as staff and for the ambassadors, and it gives the ambassadors the background as why we're here as a park and what our purposes are as an authority. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for your presentation, and thanks to everybody for joining us tonight, and have a lovely evening. Thanks ever so much.